Welcome to our posts. Today, we will see stories of r/entitled parents. What do you mean I can't kick a paying guest out of their room? I 31F work as a receptionist in a hotel in a small town on the Italian coast. Been doing this job for 4 years. Never before have we had to endure the arrogance of entitled parents like this year. When booking the stay, we make it clear right away that check-in is not possible before 2:30 p.m. The hotel where I work has about 70 rooms, and we are constantly full, so the housekeeping staff needs a bit of time to clean the rooms, considering that checkout is by 11 in the morning. Our housekeeping staff is amazing, fast and efficient, but they still need a few hours to clean 70+ rooms. This year there have been dozens of instances where guests have shown up at 7 a.m. demanding that we give them their room early because we have small children who suffer in the heat. On several occasions, some of these arrogant pricks even suggested that we go and kick previous guests out of bed at 7 a.m. to make room for them and their spawn. How does one even think about suggesting such a thing? Were they raised by wolves? Aren't they disgusted with themselves to even suggest such a thing? What's up with these people and their massive narcissism? Also, these entitled buttholes scream all the time about how their small children can't withstand the heat and that they need their rooms immediately, like their poor planning is my concern. And then I see them dragging their newborn babies to the beach at noon sharp under the sun in a 40°C+ degree weather. Like, are you actually concerned about the safety of your kid or not? And is it really necessary to have a beach holiday in August during a heat wave with such a small child and such poor planning? I am so sick of these folks. They firmly believe that parenthood gives them a pass to be horrible to everybody and have special privileges everywhere they go. Entitled parents are truly making the world a horrible place to live in. Edit to add, just last week I got called a bad woman by one of these entitled mommies because I wouldn't upgrade her room for free, because she had a baby, you know. The hotel was full. She wanted me to kick out another family who had regularly paid for their room with a view, just because she thought she was more deserving, being a mommy. Homegirl called me a bad woman in Hungarian, thinking I wouldn't understand. The look on her face when I told her in English, I don't really enjoy being called a bad woman, madam, was horrified to say the least. Next story. Handicapped people don't deserve a table to eat at in public. What would you have done in this scenario? I'm annoyed. I was shopping at Costco and my blood sugar unexpectedly went low. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I stopped in the Costco eating area for pizza and a smoothie. I'm parked at one of the indoor picnic tables sitting in my wheelchair, but I was clearly using the picnic table. I didn't want to eat messy food over my lap. Space for eating inside of the store is limited and Costco is packed due to it being summer here. Before I know it, a family of 3 comes and sits at my little picnic table. The wife scoffs at me saying I already had a place to sit, and proceeded to nod at my tiny manual wheelchair. She told me I didn't need the table, and that I should get up and leave so that her and her family would have a place to sit. Apparently, I'm supposed to eat in my wheelchair with no table surface and super messy food. I'm not kidding. Costco has some of the messiest pizza you can eat. Pizza grease gets everywhere when you eat it. The woman stood there staring at me like she fully expected me to grab my wheels and roll away. But I had no desire to leave the table that I had found first. And on top of that, I really didn't particularly want to sit next to her screaming toddler. It was just a weird experience. I wouldn't have minded sharing my table if they asked me nicely. It would have been awkward and uncomfortable as hell. Who wants to sit with a bunch of uninvited strangers? I then had a brilliant idea. One thing that I buy as a female in bulk at Costco is feminine hygiene products. So I just smiled at this woman who fully expected me to move. I lifted my gigantic box of feminine hygiene products out of my shopping cart and plopped them up on my half of the table. They took up a good half of the picnic table because it was a big bulky box of them. But they were very clearly marked. There was no mistaking what that box was full of. I smiled at the woman and I told her she could absolutely sit at my table with me. her little girl read the box label and asked her mom what pads are for. Well, let's just say that was the end of that entitled woman. The woman gasped in horror and quickly ushered her little girl away from me. The girl was far too young to know what pads were used for yet. Clearly, they couldn't sit next to a devil like me. I got to enjoy my unanticipated low blood sugar in peace. Normally, low blood sugar makes me feel like absolute crap, but this time I felt quite pleased. Nobody should have to eat in their wheelchair. Handicapped people have a right to use the table too. Next story. Would I be the butthole for having my father-in-law's bail revoked? My wife and I have been married for 20 years and have 11-year-old triplets, 2 boys and a girl. Back towards the beginning of the year, my Phil was arrested. Charges included inappropriate contact with a minor, sexuality, explicit conversations online, but no actual sexual assault contact. Regardless, he's a piece of crap, and there's little doubt that he's guilty. My mill is still very active in ours and our kids' lives, but one of the conditions for his bail is that he can't be in contact with any minors, so the kids haven't seen him since his arrest. We've been purposely vague with them about why they can't see him, so they do understand that he's done something wrong and we can't see him. To their credit, they never bring him up. Fast forward to last week. The kids had a back-to-school day, which included a band concert. My mill attended, which is normal, but after the concert she gave each of them an envelope. They contained a little cash as well as a note from my Phil to each kid. I brought this up with my wife, and to my great relief we were on the same page and were not happy about it. But as we were talking, she mentioned something that happened last week. She was on the phone with her mom, and without my wife's knowledge her mom put the phone on speaker and sat down with my Phil. My wife was sitting with one of our sons, and as soon as my Phil heard my son's voice he yelled, "Hey, grandson, Grandpa loves you and misses you." My wife quickly got up and ended the call, but when she came back into the room my son was understandably devastated. The worst part is that my Phil doesn't think he's done anything wrong throughout this whole ordeal, and my mill is in full-blown denial. My priority during this whole thing is my kids, and I'm afraid that these issues are not going to stop. Would I be the butthole if I reach out to law enforcement and check into having his bail revoked? My wife is on board, but this would destroy our relationship with the rest of her side of the family. Next story. I don't trust you, so I'm cutting off everyone's Wi-Fi. This has been going on for a while now. My stepdad has had it out for me ever since he met my mom. I was around 7, I think, and always odded me out from his biological kids, my stepsisters. My older stepsis, who was 15 I believe, left me and my now 12-year-old younger sister with my mom and stepdad. Wait, I'm getting sidetracked. My stepdad didn't trust me or my brother with anything on our phones at night or in general. While my brother was obviously doing bad stuff, I was using Google most of the time to look up stuff to draw, mainly Pokemon and Digimon stuff, and used relax melodies at night because I couldn't sleep well. Cut to me waking up just today and confronting my stepdad about this. Me: why have been cutting of the Wi-Fi at night? SD: because you're looking up PH all the time. Me: do you have any proof of that? He just sat there in anger for a second before cutting off all the Wi-Fi again, which got Mom super mad because she didn't know what was happening to it, but knew I couldn't do something like this. After a stern talking to, stepdad says he'll never do it again, until literally the next day, he starts crap all over again. Next story. Advice needed. My mom thinks she's entitled to make my medical decisions. IF26 have been affected by intense pelvic pain for basically my whole life, with the pain getting increasingly worse as I get older. Even with doing all the physio recommendations given to me and trying various courses of painkillers, I still regularly have days where I can barely get out of bed. Getting help has been a slow and frustrating process, made worse from a combination of COVID delays in healthcare. Doctors being quick to minimize my issues incorrectly dismiss them as normal feminine issues and general bureaucracy. I have been reduced to tears many times in chasing medical information because the system is just so slow and disorganized. Keeping on top of the progress is basically a full-time job on top of my full-time work from home job. This all context for the fact my family constantly make me feel like I'm not trying hard enough with my undiagnosed health condition. Mom especially very insistent that my problem will just be solved if I get X surgery or do Y exercises. When I explain my doctors have already reviewed and rejected those options with me over the last few months, they just act as though I don't want to fix things. I'm being stubborn. At the same time, she is very worried about me doing anything that will outwardly show I'm not doing well. Doctors recommended I use a mobility aid several months back to ease the strain on my body, and when I mentioned this, my mom shut it down completely, insisting I'm too young to need it. She thinks I just want a walking stick in order to give up just because I want it. This is on top of constantly picking at my weight, which has been going up thanks to the fact I can't exercise the way I used to. How do I get them to accept my health isn't going to be easily quickly solved? I do believe that someday I could be pain-free, but with the way my testing is going, I'm trying to be realistic that a complete solution is unlikely a long time off. Edit for facts, I don't live with my mom, but all my siblings do. I pay for my own medical appointments and she doesn't attend any, just assumes I lie about what is said in appointments. Next story. Grandmother can't accept I'm an adult and oversteps boundaries. Am I overreacting? I'm not sure if this is the right place to post this. I feel super conflicted. My 25F grandmother 69F can't accept the fact that I am grown and acts entitled to my children. She's genuinely nice most of the time, but there are things she does frequently that really aggravate me. For some backstory, I'm the first grandchild and definitely the favorite, not saying this to brag at all, trust me. My mom had me when she was 17, and my bio dad nor any of his family ever had anything to do with me. This meant that she's the only grandmother I ever had until my mom married my stepdad when I was 8. My mother and I lived with my grandmother up until that point. Even after we moved out, I would still visit her or spend the night with her all the time for years. I sort of slowed down on visiting all of the time when I began college because I had a full-time job as well. For the past few years, I will typically see her maybe once or twice a month. Each time I talk to her or visit, will make comments about how she's sad that I don't spend the night with her anymore or visit as much, despite me being a 25-year-old married woman with 2 kids on the way and a job. She complains that I don't call her enough, but the phone goes both ways. She, in her words, sits at home and does nothing all day, so why would she not think to call her family members? Despite my age, she still treats me as a literal baby. She will occasionally start rubbing my butt, singing, "Rub it and pat it," which is something she used to do when I was a baby. Every time she does it, I jump and move forward, and she'll say, "Oh, don't act like that, you used to laugh and laugh when I would do that," and I'll say, "Yeah, when I was a toddler, I'm 25 now." And she'll say, "You're always going to be grandma's baby," and I'll rub it and pat it whenever I want, and laugh. One time, my grandmother, mom, sister, and I all went on vacation. We shared one hotel room with 2 beds. My sister was in the bathroom and I wanted to change, so I told my mom and grandmother to not look my way because I was changing clothes. My grandmother said, "I'm gonna look." So I was like, "Why?" and uncomfortably laughed. She said, "It's not like I haven't seen you naked before." Again, I reiterated, "Well, that's when I was a kid, I'm an adult now." And she just laughed. It's like in her eyes I never aged past 10 years old. She will be shocked and stunned when I dislike something that I used to not be a fan of when I was a child. For example, I used to hate salads as a kid, but in my 20s I eat them all the time. She refuses to believe I really like salads because 15 years ago I didn't. When she is finally convinced, she gets sad and says things like, "I can't believe I don't even know what my girl eats anymore," which I know isn't a huge deal, but paired with everything else, it's just another thing that really irks me. Anyways, when I announced I was pregnant with twins, I announced it to all of my grandparents at once in person, my stepdad's parents and my grandmother. Once I did this, my grandmother shrieked with joy and began sobbing. She literally got in my step-grandmother's face, pointing, saying, "Those are my babies. You hear me? Mine." My step-grandmother just sort of stood there and said, "Well, I guess I should be congratulating you then." And my grandmother says, "They're more like my grandbabies than great-grandbabies, since I raised Op and she's more like a daughter." My mother gets a little uncomfortable by this because while I did live with her for the first 8 years of my life, this doesn't replace my grandmother as my mother. My mother later asked me who I wanted to be at the hospital when I gave birth. My grandmother interrupted me and said, I will be at the hospital just to let you know." I just looked at her wide-eyed and said, "I didn't say you couldn't come to the hospital." And she said, "Oh, I know, I'm just saying, I will be there." This has amplified throughout my pregnancy. She refers to my children as her babies. She tells me I shouldn't do certain things, such as carry a 5-pound duffel bag, because I'm hurting her babies. My mother, grandmother, and I went baby clothes shopping, and there was a shirt that said "Mama's Boys" or something like that, and she pointed it out and said, "You don't even need to worry about buying a shirt like that. They're going to be Grandma's boys, so I'm settling that right now." She even refers to them as her babies to other people. I was at her house with my mom, and my great-aunt called my grandmother. My great-aunt asked, "Have you had your babies yet?" And my mom, stunned, asked, "What?" My grandmother turned and pointed to my stomach and said, "My babies," and began rubbing my stomach. She even began saying, in front of my mom, who is the actual grandma, "This is your grandma. You hear me? Grandma." Sometimes, instead of acting super entitled, she'll switch and act like she's outcasted. She will say things like, "I sure hope you let me see these boys at least sometime. I would be so sad if you didn't," for no reason. I have never stated that I would withhold them from her, but she acts like I'm never going to let her see them out of the blue. All in all, the reason why I find it hard to set boundaries with her and why I feel so guilty is because my grandfather passed away when I was 18. They were together 40 years, and I know she misses him dearly. She lives all by herself, and I understand that she is very lonely. She's said that my kids have given her a purpose again, and she's excited to feel needed again, which is a big thing for her. Example, she got sad when my little sister got her first car because she wouldn't need her anymore to take her to school. She has done a lot for me and my family, and while I do love her a lot, these things she does really drive me up a wall. It's like she's trying to take the place of both my mother and I when it comes to my children. She lives completely in the past, and it seems like she almost resents the fact that I'm an adult and need to be treated with respect. She wasn't like this at all before my grandfather died, so I know it has to be something caused by grief. I just need to know, am I overreacting by being uncomfortable and annoyed by all of these things? My mom gets annoyed with her a lot, so she understands, but my stepdad tells me I'm being too sensitive. Edit. Thank you all so much for your input. I really do appreciate all angles I've heard, but I'm just too overwhelmed to respond to everyone but to answer some questions and clear things up. She does not like animals, so getting her a pet is out of the question. She does have church friends, but she doesn't see them all the time, and she doesn't really have any interest in hobbies other than playing the piano. She's a Southern woman who got married really young and never really saw herself as other than mom and then grandma. She misses my other cousins dearly, but she doesn't see them as her own kids because they never lived with her. So she's a bit more understanding as to why they're not super close to her like they used to be. Plus, they live hours away while I live about 30-45 minutes away depending on traffic. My uncles and even my mother would sometimes joke that I was the youngest sibling, but they were never serious. I can't help but think that maybe my grandma took that to heart and thinks that my own mother doesn't even see me as a daughter. As for setting boundaries, yes, this is something I'm fully prepared to do. I'm actually having my baby shower soon, and I'm going to be announcing my boundaries for the hospital and how to treat my sons in general. No kissing, no one other than my husband in the delivery room. And when I'm done with visitors, I'm done. I actually would prefer to see my whole extended family in the hospital, because they'll only stay for a short amount of time and leave. I have a huge family, and 95% of us have stayed in the same area since the 1800s. I'm talking third cousins and beyond. So everyone is relatively close and always wants to see the new babies. If I postpone visiting until I'm out of the hospital, they'll want to stay for much longer, and I just would rather have that alone time at home. I'm excited for them to meet my sons, don't get me wrong, but if I'm being honest, a 15-minute visit in the hospital is much better than an hour stay at my house. I'm quite introverted lol. As for my grandma's actions and behaviors, I feel like a lot of people on this sub might have the wrong idea about her. I know a lot of you have probably dealt with very narcissistic family members that genuinely don't care about how they make others feel. So when you see the boundary stomping and entitlement that my grandma is displaying, a bunch of red flags start flying. Which I understand, and maybe I'm just naive to how these kinds of people really act. However, my grandma has always been a saint of a lady. She genuinely loves her family very much, and we all used to be so close. She lost her husband, my grandfather, at a time when everyone was in a transitional period in their lives. I was in college and working full-time. My cousins were either moving away or hit the teenager phase of needing to be with friends 24/7. My younger sister was in extracurricular activities that required a lot of family traveling, and my uncles both started working night shift jobs around that time. Regardless, we would try and make as much time for her as possible, but eventually everyone had to get back to their lives. So she essentially went from having 4 or 5 visits at her house throughout the week and always being in the company of my grandfather, to dwindling down to 4 or 5 visits a month and being completely alone the other times. It is very heartbreaking. That's why I have given her a lot of grace throughout the years with the guilt tripping, the boundary pushing, and treating me like a kid, because those were some of the best times of her life, and now she's living through the worst time of her life. She started behaving this way shortly after he passed away, so I doubt she's a narcissist or means bad by any of this. I know a lot of this behavior comes from wanting to feel more included, so she's inserting herself into my life even more so because she knows new babies are coming and typically moms want help. However, I do agree with this sub that she is taking it way too far. There's a difference in being excited for great-grandbabies versus quite literally claiming them as your own children. You also can't force yourself into someone's life, because that will begin to build resentment, as it has for me. I never used to feel this way about her, but now every time I see her I just feel so annoyed. I only visit her because I feel bad for her at this point. But that's because all she does is live in the past or guilt trip. All in all, I am going to set some ground rules for myself and my sons. I have to. I have never been the best for standing up for myself, but as an upcoming mother I have grown a spine for them. Thank you all again for your input. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel. Our posts